What if I told you Ferrari didn't just stumble in 2025? They built failure into the DNA of their car. What if I told you the SF25 was designed on flawed principles that sabotage their own drivers? What if I told you Lewis Hamilton's Ferrari dream has turned into a nightmare of systemic incompetence? And what if I told you this is not bad luck, but a culture of self-destruction inside Maranello? Imagine this. Ferrari, the most legendary name in Formula One, a team built on decades of passion and glory, secretly designing a car that betrayed its own drivers. The SF25 wasn't simply underperforming, it was born broken. The mistake wasn't on track, it was in the DNA of the machine itself. For fans who grew up with Ferrari as the sacred temple of speed, the revelation is devastating. This isn't bad luck. This is systemic failure, engineered into the car before it even touched asphalt. And then comes the confession buried beneath Maranello's glossy press releases. The radical pull-rod front suspension, the supposed innovation meant to restore Ferrari's edge, crippled their geometry instead. Charles Leclerc admitted he was forced into extreme setups just to survive a weekend. Lewis Hamilton, chasing a fairy tale in red, found the steering hydraulics collapsing in wet conditions. Even Fred Vasseur conceded these flaws weren't circumstantial. They were built into the SF25. Ferrari didn't stumble. They sabotaged themselves. Look at Baku, where Ferrari's strategy imploded in full view. Hamilton was eliminated in Q2 because engineers put him on soft tires despite data proving mediums were faster. The medium was much quicker. We should have used it, Hamilton fumed. In Canada, the errors piled up, a crash in FP1, a botched quali, and even a marmot incident mid-race. Each weekend turned into a case study in incompetence. Most shocking of all, after Baku, Ferrari revealed Leclerc had driven 10 laps with a failing power unit, a fact hidden until after the flag. These weren't accidents. They were betrayals of their own drivers. For Hamilton, the Ferrari chapter has curdled into a nightmare. He handed engineers detailed reports on methods, execution, even communication, a survival guide built from 2 decades at Mercedes. Ferrari ignored it. Worse, they forced him to adapt to quirks like unnatural engine braking, suffocating a style that had delivered 7 world titles. The reduced steering feedback of the SF25 robbed him of his ability to feel the car's limits, his greatest weapon. Instead of unlocking Hamilton, Ferrari shackled him. For a man who dreamt of ending his career in red, it feels like cruel irony. And the culture inside Maranello? It reeks of denial. Publicly, Ferrari spoke of execution errors and bad luck. Privately, analysis showed them being outpaced not just by Red Bull, McLaren, and Mercedes, but even by Racing Bulls and Williams in critical metrics. Mercedes erased a 100-point deficit in mere weeks, while Ferrari slid backwards and hid behind spin. They weren't fighting rivals, they were fighting themselves. The Red Empire of Formula One now looked more like a house of cards. So here is the scandal. Ferrari 2025 is not a season gone wrong, it is a season engineered to fail. From flawed suspension to negligent strategies, from wasted driver talent to corporate spin, the truth is undeniable. Ferrari's dark secret is not bad luck, nor bad weekends. Is self-destruction written in scarlet, and unless they burn it all down and rebuild, this collapse could define not just 2025, but an entire decade of irrelevance. The SF25 was supposed to be Ferrari's rebirth, the car that would finally bridge the gap to Red Bull and McLaren. Instead, it became a trap. The centerpiece of its concept was Loic Serra's radical decision to introduce a front pull-rod suspension, a system Ferrari had not mastered in over a decade. On paper, it promised aerodynamic gains by lowering the nose and freeing airflow. In reality, it crippled the car's geometry. Charles Leclerc admitted openly that he had to run extreme setups just to keep the machine stable. It wasn't about performance anymore, it was about survival. A Formula One car is meant to give a driver confidence on the edge. The SF25 gave them doubt in every corner. That is not just a bad design. That is betrayal. For Lewis Hamilton, the flaws cut even deeper. At Mercedes, he built his legend on feeling every ounce of grip through the steering wheel. In the SF25, that feedback vanished. Ferrari's hydraulic steering system, tied to the flawed suspension geometry, collapsed in wet conditions, leaving him guessing at the car's limits. Imagine a surgeon forced to operate blindfolded. That was Hamilton in the rain. Even Fred Vasseur admitted these issues were not generic, but specific to the SF25. That admission was staggering. It meant Ferrari knew their car was fundamentally compromised, yet pressed forward anyway. Hamilton didn't just inherit a difficult car, he inherited a machine that actively fought his style. His dream of driving in red had turned into wrestling with a ghost of engineering arrogance. The cascade of problems went further. The stiff front end made the car reluctant to turn in, while the rear flexed unpredictably under load. The result was a machine with two personalities, understeering into corners, then snapping loose on exit. Engineers admitted it was impossible to set up consistently, forcing Leclerc and Hamilton into desperate compromises that masked one flaw while exposing another. Ferrari's rivals refined stable, balanced concepts over seasons. Ferrari gambled on a revolution and lost. Instead of correcting course, they doubled down, patching symptoms without curing the disease. The SF-25 was not just an underperforming car. It was a case study in how ambition without discipline sabotages itself. If the SF-25 betrayed Ferrari on the engineering side, the pit wall finished the job. Race after race in 2025 became a catalog of strategic missteps that bordered on negligence. The most infamous came in Baku, a weekend that should have been straightforward. Lewis Hamilton was knocked out in Q2, not by rivals, but by Ferrari's own decision-making. The team sent him out on soft tires, despite all available data showing the medium compound was faster in evolving conditions. Hamilton was furious. The medium was much quicker. We should have used it. This was not hindsight, it was fact, and Ferrari ignored it. What should have been a clean run into Q3 became a humiliation. Worse still, after the race, Ferrari admitted Charles Leclerc had run 10 laps with a failing power unit. They knew. They said nothing. That's not bad luck. That's sabotage. Canada offered no relief, only further evidence of chaos. Leclerc's weekend collapsed under the weight of errors. A crash in FP1 set the tone, robbing him of valuable track time. Qualifying turned into a mess, with strategy calls that left him stranded on the wrong tires in the wrong window. In the race, disaster compounded farcically when a marmot on track became part of a narrative, but the real issue was Ferrari's indecision. Their calls left Leclerc exposed and Hamilton out of sync, forced into tire changes that made no sense against rivals executing with surgical precision. The Ferrari drivers weren't just fighting the car, they were fighting their own pit wall, their trust eroding with every radio message. Even weekends without headline blunders carried smaller wounds that bled Ferrari dry. Tire choices were mistimed. Weather forecasts were misread. Strategy simulations were ignored or overruled. In modern Formula One, where margins are measured in tenths a second, Ferrari bled seconds by the handful. The pattern became clear. Rivals won races through sharp execution, while Ferrari lost them through self-inflicted wounds. Andrea Stella at McLaren and Toto Wolff at Mercedes exploited those cracks mercilessly. Mercedes in particular made Ferrari's incompetence look glaring, erasing a 100-point deficit in a handful of races, while Ferrari slid further down the order. Strategy is supposed to amplify performance. At Ferrari, it became a weapon turned inward, sabotaging their own chances before rivals even needed to attack. For Lewis Hamilton, joining Ferrari in 2025 was supposed to be the romantic final chapter of his career, the fairy tale ending every fan imagined. The red overalls, the prancing horse, the chance to restore Ferrari's glory. Instead, it has become something closer to a nightmare. From the start, Hamilton threw himself into the project with the meticulous approach that defined his Mercedes years. He presented engineers with detailed reports on preparation, execution, and communication, a survival guide honed over nearly 2 decades at the sharp end of Formula One. Ferrari ignored it. Meetings turned into rituals of nodding and dismissal. The organization that should have been desperate to absorb Hamilton's wisdom treated him like an outsider, too set in their ways to listen. For Hamilton, it was déjà vu, not the dream of Schumacher's Ferrari, but the chaos of Alonso's. The SF-25 itself only deepened the pain. Hamilton's driving style has always relied on an almost supernatural ability to feel the car through the steering wheel, reading the grip at the limit and adjusting instinctively. The flawed suspension and defective hydraulics robbed him of that feedback. In the wet, the steering all but collapsed, leaving him guessing at the limits of adhesion. Imagine a pianist asked to play without hearing the notes, or a surgeon operating with dulled instruments. That is what Ferrari handed Hamilton. Worse still, they demanded he adapt to quirks that made no sense, such as engine braking configurations alien to his Mercedes years. Instead of amplifying his genius, the SF SF-25 suffocated it. What makes Hamilton's Ferrari nightmare sting most is the betrayal of expectation. He arrived in Maranello with the hope of lifting the Scuderia back to its rightful place, of cementing his legacy not just as Mercedes' icon, but as Ferrari's savior. Instead, he has been forced to wrestle with a car fundamentally opposed to his strengths and a team unwilling to adapt. His calm optimism has shifted into frustration, his radio messages edged with disbelief at decisions and missed opportunities. For fans, it is heartbreaking. The seven-time world champion, still capable of brilliance, trapped in machinery that diminishes him. Ferrari promised Hamilton a fairy tale. What they delivered is a slow-motion tragedy. Ferrari's greatest weakness in 2025 has not just been its car or its strategy, it has been its culture of denial. Publicly, the team described their failures as execution errors or bad luck. Privately, the numbers told a darker truth. They were not just behind Red Bull, McLaren, and Mercedes. They were being outpaced by Racing Bulls and even Williams in specific performance metrics. Ferrari's leadership chose spin over honesty, releasing statements that framed mediocrity as misfortune. The illusion may have comforted shareholders and casual fans, but for those who followed the sport closely, the cracks were impossible to ignore. The Red Empire was crumbling, and its leaders were painting over the ruins with bright words. The contrast with Mercedes was brutal. Only weeks earlier, Ferrari had a 100-point advantage over them in the constructors' standings. That cushion evaporated almost overnight. Mercedes clawed back the deficit with ruthless execution, sharp strategy, and consistency. Everything Ferrari lacked. By mid-season, Ferrari had slid backwards, not only failing to keep pace, but losing ground at alarming speed. Yet their press releases still spoke of missed opportunities and unlucky weekends. It was gaslighting both of their fans and perhaps even themselves. In reality, Ferrari wasn't unlucky. They were unprepared, disorganized, and unwilling to admit the scale of their decline. Inside Maranello, the culture of denial suffocated progress. Engineers who raised alarms about the SF-25's design flaws were met with resistance. Drivers' frustrations were softened in press briefings, their words edited to sound optimistic. The image of Ferrari, the proud Scuderia, draped in history and romance, took precedence over the reality of Ferrari, a team floundering in plain sight. While McLaren refined its machine into a weapon and Red Bull sharpened its upgrades, Ferrari hid behind rhetoric. The result? A self-inflicted spiral where problems were never fully confronted, only disguised. Organizational lies became their strategy, and like all lies, they eventually collapsed under the weight of truth.